I'm going to call the meeting to order. A joint meeting of Human Affairs Committee and Planning and Economic Development was held today, October 9th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber and duly noticed in two places, including the city's website, in accordance with requirements of RSA 91A2. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance.
Alderman Thomas Lopez, co-chair.
I'm here.
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr., co-chair.
Here.
Alderman at Large Shoshana Kelly, vice chair.
I'm here. I'm attending via Zoom because I'm not feeling well. I am alone in this room.
Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons. Alderman Tim Senate.
Here.
Alderman Chris Thibodeau.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govea.
Here. Co-chair.
Yeah, didn't say it here, but co-chair. Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest A. Jetty.
Here.
And Alderman Ben Clemens, Alderman at Large Ben Clemens. Okay, so we have 8 people, 7 in the chamber, 1 on Zoom, and 2 absent. We also have Bobby Bagley, Public Health and Community Service Director, Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director, and Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director.
And Chief Rourke.
Chief Rourke.
And no, it's Assistant Chief Fay, right? Kenny. I'm so sorry. Also, Alderwoman Klee is here, and then Aldermen Clement and Timmons both notified me they'd be unable to make it tonight. Getting one name wrong is not that bad. All right. So we're going to open this up to public comment. If anyone would like to comment on just anything that's on the agenda tonight. The purpose overall of this joint meeting, as Alderman Lopez explained for the first meeting, was to be more transparent with the community on what we're doing and to address the unhoused and address low-income housing throughout the city. And hopefully the goal is to come out of this committee with legislation and changes that would benefit the city as a whole, whether that's zoning, low-income housing, changes to different percentages of the median income, or anything else that we think is a good idea that might be recommended that needs to be legislated. So any members of the public, feel free if you would like to speak, your name and address for the record.
So my name is Bob Keating, 5 Coburn Woods in Nashua, and I'm speaking as a member of the Day Cafe, which is St. Pat's Church, a cafe 5 days a week, and also the Ending Homeless Fund of Harbor Care. I know that you've heard a lot about the challenges and the struggles, and oftentimes we don't hear about the successes. So today was a particularly challenging day, but in recent there's been 2 significant challenges, and challenges that have become very successful in terms of these people. And I'll kind of, for privacy's sake and kind of merging this together, I want to speak about 2 people, both of them in their late 60s. One of them might be 70, but late 60s. In terms of sleeping, until recently, and that's the part to say about where they are now, but they were sleeping outside. One of them was sleeping on a chair. That was the primary behind the place that he works. That's what one of them. The other woman was sleeping most of the time on the sidewalk here on Main Street, the Day Cafe, and for periods of time in the winter, she would stay overnight in the warming center at the Unitarian Universalist Church. Both of them significant health issues, frequent going to the hospital. The lady is continuing with medical care, but doesn't have the crisis overnight. The fellow, he showed me the discharge after a visit in the hospital because of swelling on his feet and his ankles, and very specifically, it said the primary cause is by your sleeping, because imagine he's sitting in a chair and, just his heart's not strong enough to pump his blood up. So that was the primary reason. And cost is one of the things to look at, and you just imagine what the cost is for that happening and just continuing to go. In many ways, what their issue is they didn't have a place to live. They both had Social Security. One of them works 25 to 30 hours a week. So now what's happened? One of them just very recently now has their apartment, and through the efforts collaborative of many agencies, but the health department again, just continuing whatever roadblock, it just kept working and working and working again, went to front door to help, and the person now has their place. They just move in and they're so happy. What a difference. This person actually has a house. It's unfathomable. Here's a guy who's got Social Security. One of the issues about economics is he's been scammed. He's just...
30 seconds.
Okay, all right. So, the other one, she has a house. She's so happy. She has a pet cat. And it's the kind of efforts that you don't hear as often and you don't see, but it's just so good to see. And that's what's happened as a result of all of the efforts of the agencies, including the police department, because they've been involved, again and again in being supported. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak? All right. With that, we'll turn it over to Director Bagley and yes, thank you, sorry. Latanya. Homeless Manager. Did I get that right, Director Bagley?
Housing Services Officer.
I gotta, I feel so rusty. Maybe Tom was better to chair today.
Point out of order. Do we want to invite them to sit?
Oh, yes, of course, you can sit. Yeah, you don't have to, you can grab a seat here and present.
Sure. Do you have the little PowerPoint clicker?
Right over here.
Oh, it's right here.
You're welcome.
Got it. Squeeze it.
No, we're gonna have to,
Without objection, I'll accept the PowerPoint that's about to be presented.
That's fine if you don't want to take.
Do we have enough space? This is a large committee.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, after you.
Okay. So again, my name is Latanya Musioli. I am the Housing Services Officer with the Division of Public Health and Community Services. First, I'd like to take a moment to have a moment of silence just to acknowledge the land that we are on. Thank you. I'm going to dive right into our homelessness update. There are approximately 14 known active encampment sites throughout the city of Nashua. These include vehicle sheltering, tents, and tarp sites. This number does not include individuals that we consider rough sleepers or individuals that would be sleeping on the concrete, similar to the situation that Bob had just described, or on park benches. The Division of Public Health and Community Services, we try to track different encampment sites and locations. So we work very closely with Nashua Police Department and Nashua Fire Department to notify us anytime they are responding to any homelessness or encampment-related calls. And then we track this internally through a geographic information system. And then once those sites are plotted in the system, they come to me. And then I work with our community health workers to go provide ongoing outreach to those sites. So as of right now, we have those 14 sites that have come through the system. As we're completing that ongoing outreach, we are trying to count the individuals that are at these locations. We have estimated that number to be in the 70s currently. So that is the number of individuals that are living unsheltered in our community. I would like to note that this is an estimate because we do know that people move around from different encampment sites throughout the city and neighboring communities. So this is the number that we've come up with, but we've been tracking this for months. It can be often difficult to track individuals that are living unsheltered just because they have no fixed address or contact method. Oftentimes people do not have a cell phone or other means of communication. So we really depend on programs such as the Day Cafe or other places that we know our unsheltered population tend to congregate to really help meet people where they're at, aside from providing that outreach at those 14 encampment sites. Right now, we have 2 emergency shelter programs, the National Soup Kitchen and Shelter, which is often full. In the recent weeks and months, they are at capacity for the individuals that they can serve. We also have Southern New Hampshire Rescue Mission. So they have a men's shelter and a women's shelter. They often have few openings, probably 1 to 2 within the last couple of months. It is important to note that that shelter is not low barrier, so it's often not an option for individuals in our community. In terms of homeless street outreach, we have 7 Division of Public Health and Community Services community health workers that are going out to these scattered encampment sites. And we also have 1 outreach worker from Greater Nashua Mental Health. I did add on here the number of active clients that are in our coordinated entry system. So coordinated entry is a centralized process designed to help coordinate program applicant intake, assessment, and provision of making referrals for individuals to access housing. There are 3 continuums of care in New Hampshire. So we have the Greater Nashua Continuum of Care, so those numbers are from that. Currently, that number is inclusive of 39% families and 61% singles. Again, we do believe that this number is underrepresented just because it's so difficult to track individuals experiencing homelessness. I wanted to provide the committee with some first responder data. The Nashua Fire Department reported receiving 56 encampment and homeless-related calls between August 1st and September 27th. The fires that are listed include campfires and cooking fires, brush fires, tent fires, and other structures that were set on fire. The EMS calls were people requiring medical care and transport to the emergency department. Other calls did not require any further action. It may have just been for an individual that was sleeping that required no action. Just a disclaimer, the above numbers are dependent on the company officer checking the box on the electronic reporting software that a call involved a homeless person or encampment. It is suspected that some calls are not checked off and that number of responses is actually higher than what is listed on the screen. Similarly, Nashua Police Department reported receiving the following calls for service related to homelessness. So in June, there were 72, July 84, August 63, and September 77. So again, this data is believed to be underrepresented just because the calls are linked to an address normally. If somebody's calling the police department, there's normally an address associated with it. For any homeless-related calls, there's not necessarily an address. It may be a landmark. So you might be able to describe an encampment location from a variety of different methods, which makes it more difficult to pull that kind of data. So again, we do believe that these numbers are an underrepresentation of the actual number of response calls. Also included on here is the Nashua Public Library. This is a site where a lot of our unsheltered population tend to go. It serves as a warming station in the winter months and a cooling station in the summertime. It also allows individuals access to electricity to potentially charge their phones or use computers, and also meet with other service providers that know individuals will be at this location during the day. So there were a total of 188 calls between June 1st and October 3rd. It's important to note that 119 of these calls were self-initiated, which means the officer located and dealt with the issue before the police department actually received the call. For Mine Falls, there were 88 calls between that time frame, and 47 of those were self-initiated as well. So I would like to highlight the tremendous efforts of our street outreach workers through the Community Health Department and Mental Health Department, as well as our first responders. As you can see, there's a significant amount of calls that are being made and responded to. We know that our unhoused population needs more support than this, and we also recognize that many of these situations could potentially be mitigated if alternative shelter and services were available for individuals. The federal government has stated that when emergency shelters are full and permanent housing is not available, it is important for communities to expand short-term strategies to offer shelter and promote dignity, respect, and pathways to permanent housing. All shelter or short-term housing must meet standards of care rather than serving as alternative means of encampment. This means that they should meet individuals' needs, including those that may have physical or cognitive disabilities. Interim strategies range from congregate options, such as safe camping sites and safe parking programs, to non-congregate options, such as tiny homes and hotel or motel placement. Non-congregate shelter gained a lot of popularity during the pandemic, just because they were trying to keep people apart. We should note that it's important to also have low-barrier sheltering options that do not require they require few programmatic requirements and pose little barriers for people that are looking to access those services. So on this slide, it states strategy 14, which is to ensure interim strategies promote dignity, respect, and pathways to permanent housing. This comes from the federal government's guidance, 19 strategies for addressing encampments humanely. And this is part of their federal plan to prevent and end homelessness, also known as All In. I wanted to share an example. Connecticut has 2 hotels that they've converted into homeless shelters. One is the McKinney Shelter in Hartford that converted a Days Inn hotel to an 80-bed shelter for men. The average length of stay is 149 days, and they were able to house 38 people between March of 2024 and September of 2024. Case management and medical supply services and behavioral health services are provided in-house. Their other shelter option that was converted to a motel has space for 110 people, and this shelter is low barrier and offers opportunities for individuals to live with their pets and couples, which often tends to be a barrier for people accessing emergency shelter services. On the screen are some potential interim strategies that have been discussed internally with city officials. So the first, which we've presented at the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, was the Shelter and Resource Center. I wanted to share an example from Newark, New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey reported back in 2023 that they have had a 57.6 reduction in unsheltered homelessness between 2022 and 2023. This reduction was due to targeted efforts that were accompanied with the city's strategic plan. Some of these efforts included increasing low-barrier sheltering capacity. So Newark had established 2 additional emergency shelters, one of which was developed using shipping containers. Newark also established a drop-in center that was part of one of their shelters. The drop-in center allows for community members to access bathrooms, showers, laundry facilities, meals, and a recreation area, as well as connect with staff for behavioral health and medical needs, as well as case management. So this is very similar to the model that Director Bagley and I had presented back in May, I believe it was. I do have some follow-up slides that will kind of provide a refresher on exactly what was proposed. Another option is safe parking lots. So safe parking programs are something that multiple communities have been implementing across the nation. Safe parking programs allow individuals that are sheltering in their vehicles to park in designated parking lots where they don't have to fear citation. So again, right now, our community doesn't have anything like this. So we do know that there are a number of individuals that are living in their vehicles currently that are receiving parking tickets and citations. And this is just yet another barrier for people in order to keep their home, which is their car. So they have to pay off those debts in order to be able to register their car and keep their car. So we do have a number of individuals facing this issue right now. And losing one's car is something that could further destabilize that individual and make it more difficult for them to access housing. It could prevent them from being able to get to a job. We have a number of individuals in our community that are living in their vehicles that are working. The example that Bob had shared earlier is an individual who works. So a lot of our unhoused population are working, but they can't afford housing or can't access housing for a variety of reasons. So I wanted to share an example of Redmond, Washington, because they have a safe parking program that had some successes. Their parking program served 26 to 36 individuals. 35% of those individuals were able to be housed in 2019, and 34% of them were housed in 2020. The location they used was a church parking lot. There were outreach referrals into the program, so some of the individuals were vetted. Restrooms were provided. Eligibility requirements were a background check. Nobody was turned away, but there was just some additional discussion if somebody did have some kind of criminal offense on their background. Parkers were responsible for self-governing the lot, and there was a 365-day limit for individuals to use that parking lot. On-site case management was provided, as well as other supportive services that came on-site. The program cost was roughly $5,000, and that included administration costs, the cost of the restrooms that were on site, and they were also providing gas and food vouchers for some of those residents. So this is just another example of how this has been successful, but there's examples across the nation of how people were able to have that connection to case management, have some somewhat stability in their living situation, and be able to become employed and become housed. Lastly is designating an encampment site. So as previously shared in this presentation, there are roughly 14 active encampment sites throughout the city, and we have about 8 outreach workers at this time. So it's very difficult to be consistently providing the support that the individuals in these encampments need across so many scattered sites. As you saw the first responder data, again, there's a significant amount of calls coming in, and they're all in different locations. We do have some locations where there's higher call volumes, and sometimes the calls that are coming in may not necessarily require action. It may just be a community member calling because they're concerned because they see somebody that's unhoused. Nashua Police has reported that it's becoming more difficult to move folks along to alternative locations if they're in a somewhat an undesirable location, because we really don't have anywhere to refer people to. So people are really setting up encampments in areas that they are close to services downtown. They're able to access meals in walking distance. You know, we do have some individuals that have some physical impairments as well. So we're seeing a lot of these encampments in the downtown area just because people are trying to access services. I wanted to share some successes that Laconia had. So Laconia, New Hampshire had a sanctioned encampment site for 20 to 28 people. 2 of the individuals that were at the site were able to be housed while they had been staying at the encampment. 3 people went into residential treatment. 15 people became newly engaged to mental health treatment. 12 people were newly entered into the coordinated entry system. 10 of them had already been in the system prior. There were 16 total encampment-related EMS calls for a 30-day period when the encampment was open. 13 of those were regular medical calls, 3 were for overdoses, 8 resulted in transport, and 3 calls were around City Hall. There were 31 total encampment-related EMS calls for a 30-day period when the encampment was closed. So almost double the number as opposed to when the encampment was open. There were 23 regular medical calls, 7 were overdoses, 1 was an assault, 15 required transport, and 7 calls were around City Hall. Laconia's data shows that encampment-related EMS calls nearly doubled when the single-site encampment was dismantled and people were moved into scattered sites. So again, when we have a location for people to go, we're seeing less emergency response necessary, and it's easier to connect with individuals and get them connected to housing and other supportive service opportunities. So as discussed, this is just a refresher on the Nashua Shelter and Resource Center that was proposed. So we were looking at a 30-bed shelter for men and women with showers available for men and women that are also not staying in the shelter because we recognize this is a gap in our community. With 6 single rooms for transitional housing, 2 studio apartments for couples for transitional housing, and most importantly, the Resource Center. So the Resource Center would have private offices that would allow individuals to connect to behavioral health services, as well as community health workers. Right now, a current gap in our community is the lack of storage for individuals. So we often see individuals not accessing supportive services such as a warming or cooling station, even though the weather may be unsafe for them to be outside, they're not accessing these supports because there's nowhere for them to store their belongings and they're fearful of their items being stolen. This would also provide public restrooms to individuals. We know that this is a gap in our community. We have very limited public restrooms that are available for individuals that are living unsheltered. This would also provide washers and dryers and allow individuals to wash their clothing and again have some dignity and hygiene. The Resource Center would also be used as a warming and cooling station. Right now, we don't have anywhere in the community where our unsheltered population can go and stay for the whole day. People are kind of piecemealing their day, and that's when we're seeing some of these unfavorable behaviors because people don't have anywhere to go. And there's also not staff that are trained to kind of work with individuals that may have mental health conditions or substance use disorder conditions, although that's not the entire population that's experiencing homelessness. Just in terms of staffing, so this would be staffed by 2 community health workers on site, have administrative staff as well in the building, so it would be a secured building where everybody would need to check in and out, and available office space for community partners such as behavioral health providers. This would be available 24/7, so evening and night. There would be 4 staff, 2 on the shelter side and 2 on the drop-in side. And part-time per diem staff would make up this pool, in addition to a maintenance staff. So that's the estimated staffing cost at this time. And if it were to be a new construction, the total estimated cost would be about $3.8 million for a new construction. But there could be options to potentially rehab a building or utilize other structures that are already built. And that is all.
Thank you so much. We're going to open up for questions in a second, and I don't think any of us are delusioned to think that government can solve homelessness, and that it's a very complex social issue, healthcare issue overall. And we're again here to try to figure out some solutions and small things that we can do to help who is currently homeless and maybe mitigate future homelessness. Does anyone have any questions? Alderman Tebow, then Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a bunch of questions, to be honest. So if you ask people out there, people are probably going to say they feel like it's more than 70 people that are out there. And I mean, one thing I would like to do is do something with the not having encampments anymore, and that's just because it taxes the police. It just takes away services where, like you said, if they're not, a place where you can help them better, you going to 14 different places, that's not helpful to them, and it's not helpful to the city services. What percentage of the people that are unsheltered or homeless at this point are people who would accept help? Like, what's the percentage that, like, just no matter what, say, I don't want your help, I'm going to remain this way?
I think we have I don't have the exact numbers, but we have a small amount of individuals that really want to be left alone. I would say the majority of folks are willing to talk with our community health workers. They're willing to be entered into our coordinated entry system to be prioritized for housing. We work with a number of individuals to help them become employed, and also look for housing options. Again, there's multiple barriers, so if somebody has multiple evictions or even one eviction, that's a barrier to accessing housing, especially if they had a voucher. They no longer can have a voucher or apply for a voucher if they've had an eviction while they had one. Also, criminal records are something that's really a huge barrier for a lot of the population we work with. So we do have a good number of individuals want to work with us. There's just so many barriers in place that it's really difficult and takes a significant amount of time to get people housed.
Yeah, follow up, please. So you'd said that, I saw the statistics on the police calls, so this might be a police question. And at the library, there was 188 calls. Are these calls mostly non-criminal more like drug type use as opposed to any kind of violent crime or any kind of crime that's on someone else? Do we know?
Non-criminal.
Non-criminal, okay. And then,
Another follow-up.
yeah, just one more. This proposal at the end here, is there a place that you guys have picked out or are thinking that that's where we would like to put people or build this place or, own this place? Do you have an idea yet? No?
We don't. We've been discussing multiple options internally, but we haven't found anything right now.
I would say if we had all the money in the world, I would say, what about the place across from you guys that's just sitting there completely abandoned? You got a parking lot. I think that would be a
First, we have to
space
build it
use.
down and burn it down and build the whole.
Yeah, you would have
Yeah.
to,
It's a good location.
significant work inside, but where would we get the money for this place? Is it already in our budget, or is it a different expenditure we'd have to make, or?
So one of the things that we did was we presented this as a part of a capital project.
Okay,
Part of the
We
ad hoc.
also,
Part of the ad hoc.
okay.
and then there's also some funds that'll be coming through the opioid abatement, New Hampshire Finance Association. There's some funding that'll be coming through there. And then there's also for the staffing, we could use some of the opioid abatement funds that we currently have. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. Bobby Bagley, Director of Division of Public Health and Community Services.
Thank you, that's it for now.
What about low-hanging type of things that don't have a cost, like a public health advisory for affordable housing being in a shortage, to explain to this board that it is a public health crisis, that we don't have enough affordable housing in the city in which people can either obtain or sustain, to express the seriousness to the board when it might come time that project comes before us, to say this is a public health crisis, just much like you did when we had, not here, maybe like, a listeria outbreak or something like that, because this is a health crisis. It's, social health, mental health, various types of health, and housing first is healthcare. So even just a non-binding resolution that comes forth at your recommendation as medical professionals that says that we have a shortage and you guys need to do something about it. Or I know Director Sullivan's hiding, it's not his turn yet, but engaging with the rezone to figure out, you mentioned the tiny homes, where can we find space to zone the city that would allow for tiny homes or for other aspects throughout the city, and making a formal recommendation as healthcare providers that say, this is a problem, we're hoping that you guys can find a spot. Not saying it's going to happen next year, but down the road, if someone wants to build those, we have a spot that development can come in and make them. Sorry. I'm sure we'll talk more and more about that. Alderman Lopez.
Quick question for LaTonya. You open a lot of your presentations with a moment to recognize the land. Can you tell us about the origins of that and how long that's been, what that's meant to communicate?
Yeah, so through the work over the past several years in many of the public health conferences and meetings, there's been a real push to acknowledge, because we've taken an equitable approach, using the equity lens in the work that we do, to acknowledge, make land acknowledgements before presentations to, again, recognize the Indakana were the original peoples on this land that we're on here in Nashua, and so as to give tribute and recognition of that. And it's something that has become pretty standard in public health arenas and in presentations for that acknowledgement to be made. That actually came from the Medical Association.
I think it's an important acknowledgement to recognize, because we are the city of Nashua. It's named indirectly after the Nashua River Indians, and essentially we're sitting on land that at one point did belong to other people. And we're talking about a population of people that are our own citizens, our own brothers, cousins, uncles, nephews, that are frequently treated as though they're on somebody else's land and need to move off of public land or don't have a right to private land, where they have as much right as we do, other than less paper to prove it. And I think it's important as a city that we focus on treating people as people. I think, Tanya, to your point, you demonstrated that when we try to dehumanize or other the populations that are struggling economically, it's not like they disappear. They still find a solution to their immediate problems, and that creates very unpredictable situations for the fire department or the police department, or even local businesses that are struggling with people who had to figure out how to shelter themselves, how to charge their phones, where to go to the bathroom. So I think it's just important perspective that we need to be treating people who are homeless as people first. And the strategies that we've been talking about, I think the public health has done a really good job of trying to focus that approach. And I think the police have as well. I think generally the public has a perception of the police as the bouncers of the city, where the police have invested a lot of time and effort into authentically connecting with resources, supports, and services, because the police department isn't a bunch of others either. It's a bunch of people who are moved by the situations they see every day and are trying to make a difference on it. My second question, maybe a little bit less leading, was you mentioned that the rescue mission doesn't meet low barrier shelter criteria, I guess. I think we know, generally speaking, there's an ideological component to it's a rescue mission, so you have to be willing to go to a rescue mission. Are there specific medical or substance use components to not being a low barrier entry? Is there a handicap accessibility issue or something?
So it would really just be allowing people to come in with, again, the least amount of barriers, so people can come in under the influence. You can't use substances on site, but you don't necessarily have to be in recovery to access those shelter services. So it's not an option for some of the individuals in our community that need emergency shelter but are still not in the recovery phase of their substance use disorder.
Is there, if I can follow up?
You're the co-chair, for sure.
I'm trying to abuse it from over here, though. Is there a consistent and regularly scheduled outreach to the rescue mission to make sure that services that emergency shelters might offer, like case management or benefits counseling, that kind of stuff is being done over there?
Yes, they're collaborating with public health and a number of different agencies in the community.
Okay. Are there any entities you think, I guess that's kind of a hard to answer question, but I know we've talked at the Human Affairs Committee about a number of recovery programs in different phases of recovery. Either, it may be two people sharing a room that are both in recovery, or it may be a landlord who just says, okay, everyone here can't have recovery. Is there any way to work with the building department to identify places that might benefit from a closer connection with outreach or support services to sort of prevent people from fully becoming homeless?
So we have, there is a public list, I don't know if it's a state website, of certified recovery homes. So we have identified the ones in our community, and we have been reaching out to those recovery homes to try to collaborate further.
Okay, thank you.
I have Alderman.
Alderman Moran?
Yeah, I have Alderman Senate and Alderman Kelly on deck in the queue, and then I was just going to quickly ask Chief Rourke. How do you feel Manchester's handling their new ordinances, moving people along with fines? Is that, in your field, have you heard that that's working or not working, or just for show? You know, what are your thoughts on it?
Quite honestly, I don't have enough information to comment on that.
How about if there was an ordinance in this city, do you think it would be effective to fine homeless people to move along?
I guess I would answer that yes or no. It would give us something. Listen, when this thing started, and we've been there right from the beginning, and arresting someone and putting them in, they're gonna get right out. Is that helping anybody? No, not really. Have some of our officers been injured? Yes, and try and help them. You know, it is a yes and no answer. Lately, it's been, and I think Latanya touched on it, at the beginning, and the mayor was out with me on a walk months ago. The relationship was great, and people were moving along at the beginning, but recently they've been a little bit more aggressive and not so easy to move along. So, you know, when we have nothing to move them along, that's tough to deal with. But we've been pretty successful so far, but just the resistance has shown up in the last couple of months.
So potentially something to consider and talk about to put in your tool chest to use at your discretion, potentially.
Yeah, and the goal here is not to arrest people or give them a ticket. Like Latanya touched about earlier, you know, you take someone, you tow their car and you take them away. Now that, you know, as they take a step forward, they're taking 10 steps back, right? You know, the $80 they had, it's actually more than that now for a tow vehicle. If someone has $250 left in their savings, and now they're gonna get their vehicle out of a tow lot that costs $150, you know, what do we do
Making the
there?
problem worse, yeah.
So,
I agree. I have, one of my businesses downtown Manchester. I haven't seen any changes. You know, someone camps out in the back in our entryway, and they're gone for an hour and they come back. So the fine or whatever means nothing to someone who's in a condition that they can't afford to even get a hotel room. But sometimes having that ability to say, hey, let's at least go down to the shelter, or this isn't the spot, the spot's down there, can be helpful.
sure, and the guys and girls in our department, we've educated them on this, and everybody's willing to help. You know, so they know that these people don't have a lot of money, so sticking them with a fine, I don't know if that's the correct answer, but in some sense, it does give us a little leeway to push someone along and go to another place, you know, there is some backing there, so.
Appreciate that. Alderman Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, I'm going to belabor a point and beat a proverbial dead horse. The proposal plan idea that you presented here tonight is, I think that's an admirable goal for the city to be striving toward. But my current concern is that every day this week I've woken up cold, and that's on me because I haven't turned on my heat yet. But I wore a jacket in tonight, and I wore a jacket into work this morning, which tells me that it's getting cold overnight. 9 months ago, maybe a little less, we were in here at the end of January approving the funding for a overnight drop-in warming center, which, again, while admirable, I thought came too late. Where are we today on October 9th in consideration for this coming winter in providing a similar resource for the overnight?
So it's certainly something that we're looking into and trying to push forward to come back and propose. We did put an RFP out for the space to utilize for an overnight warming station, and we didn't get any bids. So in public health, we're just trying to have communication with some local organizations and businesses and try to figure out if we can have a space to lease and use for this purpose.
Follow-up. Was there not interest in the location or from that provider from last year?
Correct.
Okay. That's it for me for now.
Alderman Kelly, then Alderman
Did you just call on me?
Yes. Go ahead, Alderman
Can-
Kelly.
I didn't know if you could hear me.
Yeah, we can.
I'm having troubles on my end. Okay. So my question was around the cost that you shared. Is that just staffing alone, and is that a 1-year sum?
Yes, from the numbers that were presented this evening around staffing, that was just for 1 year.
Okay, second question I have.
Follow up.
Have you considered a mobile option versus a brick and mortar?
We had not.
Did you hear her, Alderman Kelly?
I did hear her answer.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Is that, just to bounce off, is that a common thing to have a, almost like a FEMA kind of situation?
In some of the research and looking at some of the other cities, we had not seen that as an option. I don't know if you came across anything. Most of what I've seen has been some of the things that were stood up during COVID, which were the tiny houses or the pallet houses. I do know that for a short period of time, our National Soup Kitchen and Shelter did purchase a mobile unit, but it was just for temporary use for folks that were in the shelter that had COVID. So it wasn't meant to be like long-term, it was just to
Oh,
get
I'm
them.
sorry. Let me see if I can clarify. I was talking about the resource center specifically, and I was thinking about the capital costs of trying to find a location for it. So I was specifically talking about the resource center, and would it be an opportunity to do something that's, on wheels? You can go to the population and would be less of an intensive infrastructure investment.
So right now, we're currently using our mobile van from Public Health, and we're also collaborating with St. Joseph's Hospital to provide mobile support and medical attention to some of our encampment sites and other hotspot areas to address the need. But really, what people need is a place to go inside. And just kind of spend time inside and connect with a variety of providers. So it would be more effective to have a single structure where different providers could come and individuals could stay throughout the day. Right now, people might come onto the mobile van to receive services, but then they're off the van so that somebody else can step on and receive services.
Are you, just want to make sure I understand, so that makes sense to me. Are you considering it allowing sort of a day program, or is it just that time in which they are off the street?
It's really meant to be a place where individuals can come, again, offering that low barrier option for individuals that need to come inside, warm up or cool down, as well as connective to supportive services. So as we do our street outreach, it can take weeks, months for us to really build rapport with individuals. So as we're going out to those 14 encampment locations, we're sending the same community health workers to those sites so that they could build trust with the individuals that are living there. So the goal is really to have a single structure place where people can consistently come, see consistent faces, and be ready to make the behavioral changes that they need to make, move forward with any kind of housing or other options. Unfortunately, a large number of our unhoused population have some distrust just for some service systems, just because of negative experiences. So we're really trying to work with individuals to build that trust so that we can help support them in accessing housing and additional supports.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I know that trust is incredibly important with this community. I also just wanted to point out that I think the other alternatives that you had talked through, the key component that I hear, having done this work for a long time, is making sure that there is support services, whether you go to one encampment or you have, tiny houses. Everything that I've seen in the research and the work is that the supportive services are so critical to helping, continue people along and being able to get housed and start to thrive.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Alderman Kelly. We're going to have Alderman Klee and then Alderman Lopez on deck. I had a question, but I had lost it. I'll come back.
I'm sorry, Alderman Moran, I can't see you, so if you were telling me, I wasn't
I was saying thank
necessarily
you.
knowing.
I was saying thank you for your comments. Me? Yes, I'm very soft-spoken, unless my kids are around and I yell a lot. Alderman
Breathe from the
Clee.
valley.
Thank you. Prior to coming here, I actually was speaking to Alderman Long from Manchester to ask him about exactly what you asked Chief Rourke. How was their program going? And he lives in the downtown area. To kind of get a firsthand as to how he feels. And he actually was one of the creators of that particular piece of legislation. So obviously, he's going to have a positive feel about it. They, as far as like the fines and so on, they don't do the criminal type of thing. They just do the fines. And the harsh thing is, like, when fines can get up into higher numbers, they do a forgiveness program of fines if they can turn themselves around so that this doesn't become something that hurts them in the future. I have anxiety about fines. I have anxiety about hurting someone's future. So I'm just putting that out there. But one of the things that LaTanya had kind of mentioned was one of the issues that we have, and that's storage. They actually have a storage facility. And that was one of the key things that they put together, was to have this storage facility to build trust. And he said that was a key element to kind of help. One of the things that they're looking into now, and believe it or not, I'm going to call them the fancy toilets. Not porta potties, but the fancy toilets. One of the ones we talked about, and they're not cheap. We laughed about the ones in San Francisco where you go in and they can go in and they clean themselves, and they have X amount of times before they'll lock themselves and so on. But they also have the ones where you can go in, you come out, it turns itself around while it's cleaning the other one, and they're so on, and then they can't get like toilet paper stuffed into them and so on. I mean, they're actually looking at these things. Granted, it's got an $80,000 price tag on it, and people will free, but it stops people from going into alleyways and so on. So they are looking into all of these elements. So there are price tags with all of these things. So there are different things. But the question, and if I may ask, now that I've just kind of gone over, the question that I have asked with, when we talk about this shelter and this resource center and so on, we talk about having 70, and Alderman Thibault actually asked the question that I was thinking about, the percentage of people that would go in there. If we built something like this and we have these 30 beds and the transition type of housing and so on, this is not necessarily going to stop these 70 people that we currently have. Are we still going to have this issue of the tents on the Riverwalk? I'm getting calls, as you know, and as Chief Kenny knows, I'm forwarding you emails and so on about tents that are showing up on the Riverwalk, or tents over by Atherton or by, Thoreau's Landing, because that's where these campsites are showing up and so on. Is something like this going to stop that? This is a wonderful thing. I think this is a great program because we need to help all these people. But I'm getting the questions of, why are we spending all this money on a Riverwalk when we've got all these tents showing up? And people from Jackson Falls are looking over at the library, and suddenly we have all these tents. And I'm getting pictures of it. I don't need the pictures because I can see it. But so that's just kind of some of the questions and the issues, and how do we help that? And if I know I'm going
That's
on
okay.
long, I
Yeah.
apologize.
Very
But to the question of, our police officers are having a problem moving them along. So do we consider some type of legislation that gives them power? I don't want to put legislation that makes it powerless, but do we give them something that just kind of gives them the issue to help LaTanya kind of say, okay, let's move along, and then they can use programs like, if you help clean yourself up, we can use the Second Chance program that Lowe's and Home Depot will not make you have to click off that little felon box, as long as you're clean, and you can get a job there, and different things like that. I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily, but there's that Second Chance program. When I was up in the State House, that was one of the first things that I had learned about was that kind of a program where these big box stores of Walmart's and Home Depot and said, we're not going to make you click that box as long as you pass the no drug test. We're going to ignore the fact that you weren't necessarily a felon. So we can help you get a job and so on. So, but if we can get them along and get them into a shelter and get them to do something like this, we can work these programs, but maybe give our police officers some kind of help and a push. So, long story, but anyways, just something to say.
It's a hard answer.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you need to give.
So I have a couple of things I'd like to say. I know that, there's been a lot of attention to what Manchester's doing. In my role, I do like to look nearby regionally, but I'm also looking nationally. So in public health, we are meeting monthly with our federal regional advisor from the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. So we are receiving federal guidance on best practices and things that have been proven to work in communities in New England and nationally, and things that don't work. And often what comes up is the criminalization of homelessness through any ordinance. It's not a best practice, and it's not recommended because it further destabilizes individuals. It might start off as one citation. We might have people that are repeat offenders. We have a number of individuals that, again, are struggling with substance use disorder, mental health disorders, as well as different disabilities. It could be an intellectual disability, developmental disability. So we have people that may not have the capacity to understand that they're not supposed to be in a certain area. So they could receive repeat citations. Or individuals that, don't pay their citation, don't show up to those court dates, and they're just non-compliant. Having people be essentially forced into treatment or compliance with certain things just isn't proven to be successful. Individuals, unfortunately, need to be able to move forward at their own pace, and they need to be willing to engage in order to be successful. It's housing first, but not housing only. We can't plop somebody in an apartment and say, okay, they're in an apartment, they're good. We do need those supportive services ongoing to work with individuals to help them remain housed. So we're really looking at the best practices. So anytime I'm presenting anything internally to the city, to our external partners, I'm looking at the best practices across the nation and really using that as a guiding source to make those educated recommendations. There was a lot in the question, but I think there needs to be multiple things. I don't think that a shelter and resource center will solve everything. But I do think that there's going to be a significant amount of money that would be needed to have multiple things in place. Right now, we're just assessing the need. We know that there's a number of individuals living in their vehicles in the community, and we know people are receiving citations. We know people are currently at risk of having their vehicle towed. Those are facts. We know there's a number of individuals living on sidewalks, living in encampment sites, living under tents, living on mattresses in the community, and we know that Nashua PD and Nashua Fire are being called out repeatedly to these sites, and we know that it's very difficult to move people along and say, hey, you can't stay at the library, and then we get asked, well, where can I go? We don't have an answer. So we're seeing more aggression from people because they're being moved around everywhere, and we're really not coming up with any solutions on how can we actually support these people? How can we provide them with the hygiene facilities that they need? How can we provide people with the storage that they need? How can we provide people with that basic level of security and safety that they need so that they can further work on other aspects to obtain a job, maintain their health, obtain housing, maintain relationships, and just kind of work on those things. So I think, to answer your question, it would have to be a combination of things, and there's still going to be a number of individuals that are chronically homeless that may not be willing to engage in supportive services. We know that there's still going to be people outside. I don't think we can get to the number 0 of people in our community to make sure everybody's inside, but I think we can get very close. And I think that we need to be offering a variety of options and give people choice in their own plan of either recovery or accessing housing and moving forward. So I think it has to be a combination of something like a resource center where people can go to when they're ready to make a change or receive services. That could be an alternative location for the police to send people to as well. Manchester, they have their shelter that also serves as a resource center. So they're able to move folks along to that location because it's somewhere that people can go. We currently don't have that. So that's where we're seeing some of that resistance. So I think it's a variety of things that we would need to put forth in order to reduce homelessness in the community. And again, on public health's end, we're looking very closely at prevention as well. So we're looking at interrupting those pipelines into homelessness and really stopping that source before people actually get onto the street. Because again, once you have that eviction, it's very, very difficult and very time-consuming to get you housed.
May I?
Yes.
First off, I 100% agree with you. The idea of criminalizing homelessness, I've had anxiety about this at the beginning, and every time I speak to any of my constituents and I talk about any of this, that's the first thing I say is because I do not want anybody to put homelessness and substance misuse in the same sentence, because that is not the case. You know, yes, there are people that fit both categories, but that is not the case. And I think we see a lot of homelessness in people in cars and so on. At least I started seeing it even in my ward when places like Walmart said no more parking, no more camping in my place. And I think while I had a lot of friends that did RVs and that was their favorite place to stop, I think there were a lot of people that were using that as well. So, and I think that's what some of the cities are seeing as a result of that. So please understand, that was not my intent to say that. When I talk to the people in Manchester, to say to them, are you just kind of using this as a tool to kind of push people, or are you really giving a lot of tickets and so on? And the answer was, to what Chief Rourke said, yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes, and no, sometimes. Sometimes just the threat of it, and sometimes, yes, we have to. If there's a lot of needles and so on, then yes, that they have to do that. And they might have been taken in anyways because of that. And in their case, where they've got the big park, the Veterans Park and so on, and families weren't able to use the park because you couldn't let the kids play with it. So there's a difference than what we have here. So if I just
Yeah.
make, that was kind of the point that I was trying to say. And again, for the residents and the citizens seeing our Riverwalk with these tents that are popping up so openly and they can't walk through, and the noise level and things that are happening there, that is, and trust me, we're blessed to have someone like you and Director Bagley and so on doing so much work. So nothing I have said here is critical. And I want to commend, I love the fact that you say consistent faces. I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the one thing I know is we always try to make sure that we had consistent faces with our veterans, and we could not save all of them. But the minute you changed the face of who it was that was working with them, I worked at the Bedford VA, which was a psychiatric facility. The minute you changed the faces, you lost them. So thank you for that. And I'm done.
Thank you. And I got Alderman Lopez, Alderman Govea, Alderman Tebow, but I'm going to add in. When it comes to collaboration with the community providers, I know resources for everyone is limited in this state because mostly everything is grant pass-through funding, and people are very protective of the resources that they do have, and sometimes people get, oh, go here, go here, go here, and then maybe if they can't help you, then we might be able to help you, but they have to say no first. And these are real-life examples. I'm a social worker, so I deal with this stuff all the time. I also travel across the country and speak as an expert on recidivism, and homelessness is a huge part of that. And I've always remind myself when I'm talking about academic research and data that I can have all the research data and that says this is the way we have to go for that individual person or this group of population, but then there's the practical piece of it. If I go and I'm teaching lawyers and judges and prosecutors how to make sure that someone's a good fit for pretrial, for example, and everything's good except for they have no place to stay. And I can say, oh, they can go to the shelter between 4:30 and 5 and sign up and they might get a bed. The judge will look at me and say, yes, they're low risk at reoffending, they're low risk, they'll appear. But if you can't get a letter that says that that person can go there, they're not leaving the jail. Because there's the practical fact of the reality that we sit in. And it could even be something as the economic development director pulling out our own research that says encampments will drive down revenue for the downtown businesses. So there's always research and data. It's just finding a soft spot or a medium spot to find where it works for as many people as possible, including those who are at risk. And so so when I'm talking about the resources, for example, I know I can send someone in a mental health crisis to the crisis departments, but are they going to have staff to let them in? And then that's a state mandate. And then we're back at it again. A judge might say to me, yeah, I'll let them out. Call up the crisis departments. Oh, we don't have anyone this weekend. And the judge will say, no, I'm sorry. So Valley Street becomes a shelter. And they're still homeless. If it weren't for them being involved in the criminal justice system, they're still homeless. So it's just finding these caveats that you try to help repair the system to maintain stress or prevention, like you discussed. Alderman Lopez.
So I believe it was less than 6 months from when Manchester implemented its regulations regarding homelessness, and the first time a civilian caught video footage of them misusing it, challenging homeless people to a manhunt and, kind of playing games with them. I don't think that is a good climate for us here in Nashua. I know our police are respected, and I know our police have worked to build a good relationship with the communities that they serve. But I think as soon as we start moving in that direction, then we are going to create conflict and competition. It was already said earlier, Ms. Latanya already had mentioned that the vast majority of people who are unsheltered don't want to be unsheltered, and they will use resources if they're offered, if they have reasonable opportunities. And we've talked about the shortfalls of resources here. We've repeatedly said there's nowhere to move them on to. So asking our police to do that not only becomes somewhat fraught with disaster, but it also becomes an expectation of the police. How many times are they going to get a call from a business owner who says, you're supposed to move them on, this is a crime, you have to do that? And how many times have the police had to enforce something literally because the community told them to? I don't think it's a good idea to go in that direction and create that intersection if none of us here are actually willing to do the work to make sure there's someone to move on to. I think there's an institutional bias when it comes to homelessness. I think consistently every year I've tried to offer more and more resources to certain departments that have pushed back and said that, no, we can do what we can with our budget. There's a reluctance to spend more money on the problem. We all know we're about to grease the wheels crazy just to get a football field fixed in short order. Not even to make sure that it's fixed, because it's probably not going to be fixed in the fall based on the timelines we're looking at, but just so we can show the public that we are actively working on that. That is the approximate cost of the drop-in center that was requested in the ad hoc committee. And that didn't even make it to the priority list. So we don't take this issue as seriously as we can collectively. Some departments do and have been growing and developing and using every resource that they can, but we don't prioritize the financial support for these programs, and I don't know that we actually support the nonprofits in the community that are doing the work as well as we could be doing. We're all there for Christmas, and we're going to be there for their auctions and whatever to lend our personal support and make sure we take the selfies, but we're not going to defend them when the public starts saying, hey, these organizations, they create an imposition on our downtown. So I think collectively as aldermen, as leaders, we need to start standing up for people who are actually trying to make a solution happen rather than shovel the problem away, treat people like others, and maybe pat ourselves on the back when that's all said and done, that we did the right things, and then go home to sleep in our beds. I think there's a big difference when it comes to who's really vulnerable here and who's not. And I think that we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot to do. We shouldn't be trying to figure out whether or not we can fund these types of programs when we know we need them. We should be figuring out, why don't we all collectively try to connect with whoever we can and create whatever partnerships we can to ease the burden. Specifically, in terms of spaces and trying to engage partners, it was brought up by Alderman Kelly, an idea of a mobile location. And while I don't necessarily think that like a trailer or something is going to meet need or do anything but create a scavenger hunt for where is it today, I do think it might be an idea to engage the faith community and see if some of them have in the past been able to manage day programs over short sprints. And we have in our history in Nashua had the Interfaith Coalition able to support at least warming stations on a rolling basis. Is that something that, number one, we have looked at in terms of why don't we try piloting a warming or drop-in center with a month-by-month stakeholder buy-in model? And number two, would there be reimbursement funds or compensation for doing that for any partners?
I don't believe we've looked at the month by month, so I appreciate the recommendation. And in terms of utilizing the space for the warming station, it would be through a lease. So there would be compensation.
Okay. And then additionally, there was talk about motels. I don't know if that's a specific type of demographic or design because of the residential component. But specifically speaking, have we reached out to Daniel Webster College? They were literally trying to host, the landlords were trying to host the Stepping Stones program. Have we been able to make that connection, or?
We have not at this time.
Okay. Is that because we can't find them again?
That usually is one of the issues.
Okay, so for people who don't know, those landlords are like the most elusive ever. But at least I have something I can try to do is rattle the trees and figure out if we can find somebody, if a contact will at least help. And if any members of the public are listening and are interested and have ideas, then, I mean, bring them forward. Because if we, as Alderman Sennett pointed out, this isn't the time for the philosophical navigation of whether or not we should be helping our fellow men or anything. It's October. We know it's getting colder. We know there's a problem for many on the horizon. And, earlier this week, we were talking about hazard mitigation. We should be building the capacity to address that as soon as possible. And I don't think that's just one department's job. I do think we should be mindful of that other concept because I've gotten some of those messages too regarding the people on the Riverwalk. And I've gotten some cell phone pictures, and we're very free about taking pictures of the homeless and the homeless encampments. I feel like if the homeless pulled their phones out and took pictures of the people taking the pictures, that would be a crime. That would be an invasion of privacy. And we can talk about the fancy bathrooms and all that kind of stuff and the expenses attached, but we won't open the bathrooms in City Hall. So we have plenty of action steps that could happen right now, but we have to get past the idea that this is an optional challenge and that these people somehow earned their fate and it's up to them to fix it.
The bathrooms are for everybody, too. I was out in Astoria, Washington, last 2 weekends ago, or a week and a half ago, and there's just a random bathroom in the middle of a park that's all tin, and it's for everybody, homeless, and it's very clean, well-maintained, and then you go down, another block, there's another public bathroom, all across the Pacific Northwest.
Right, we could use these bathrooms, too, if we open them, just saying.
And they don't seem to be fancy. No. They're just tin, like you would see, kind of like maybe in an old prison movie, all metal. But privacy, and the water is pumped up or some kind of action.
I think it's the Portland Loo. It's something that we've been discussing internally as well. Our city's health officer, Heidi Peak, was actually the one that brought it to a lot of our conversations. Because not only is it a better eyesight for people to see in the community than a porta potty, but there's also some safety things that go along with it. So if somebody were to try to store substances or paraphernalia, there really is no way to do so in that structure. And they are easy to clean.
Before going to Alderman GOV, are you guys able to recoup payment from Medicaid? And I'm sure it's not a lot based on what's available on this fee schedule, but Is that something that you guys are actually submitting bill and reimbursements for?
We have actually submitted an application to be a Medicaid reimbursable entity. We used to be when we had our well child clinic back in, probably back in 2000, it was a while ago. So we are trying to reinstate that. And we did learn that the community health workers depending on the service that they're providing, can be reimbursed through Medicare and Medicaid. So we are looking into that.
And I would recommend, since you are a public health region, requesting a waiver from Medicaid to bill for case management and the community caseworkers. And then there's another one. But typically it's reserved for mental health centers. But as a public health region, you can request a waiver and be permitted to do so. It's in statute for the Mental Health Services Act. Sorry. Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as my colleague from Ward 3 brought up about the ad hoc committee, and I do remember going over the kind of proposal for a project like this a little bit. And it didn't make the final ad hoc committee findings. So, I mean, that pushes out to about FY30 in that time frame a little bit. So what are steps and what direction would you like us to take? Something that could be done relatively soon to help this issue?
I think our community is at a point of looking at some of those interim sheltering solutions. So on one of the slides, I had put either, establishing a safe parking program, a designated encampment site that has basic necessities such as bathrooms, hand washing stations, other areas for people to utilize, or even just some sort of resource center that doesn't necessarily need to be a shelter. But I think right now, as we're getting into the winter months, there's a lot of people, I go out to the encampments myself, people are scared. They are afraid that winter is coming. They are afraid to be outside. I was talking with a gentleman today over at the library who was discussing how cold it was, and he said once it gets down, below 50, it gets really scary for them. So I think in terms of immediate actions, I think we need an immediate action to find some sort of interim shelter solution, because we know our current emergency shelters are already at capacity.
Follow-up, if you don't mind. And out of those interim studies that you presented in front of us, which one do you think would be most favorable? I mean, at the end of the day, this is going to be your department who has to really deal with the day-to-day operations. So what would be the best option in your opinion?
I can't pick one, just because if we're looking at a safe parking program, that's only us catering to individuals that have the privilege of having a vehicle to live in. Meanwhile, there are people that are still outside living in tents in multiple areas that they're being moved along from. So if we were going to do like a joint like one designated encampment site that could accommodate parking and tenting, that could be a potential option. Or, I mean, again, the resource center at least would serve as a place, as a warming station for people to come in, warm up, and get connected to services. It wouldn't serve as a shelter, but it would be a location that people can be moved along to, potentially have storage in, and get connected to resources and warm up.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Senate, then Alderman Tebow, but I just want a quick follow-up. What about using Elm Street School as a warming station? I'm very mindful that the Ward 6 Alderman is sitting right next to you, and he probably has a much better handle of Ward 6 than I would ever have.
It's in
But-
Ward 4?
It is in Ward 4, is it?
It's on the wrong side of the street.
Oh, well, I'm sorry then your opinion means nothing. Well, very territorial from
It's
Alderman.
a learning center. It's a place
but-
of learning.
I mean, it's not being used. It's been turned over to the city. I believe we're still paying for heat, right, Director Sullivan? I know that's more of a Director Cummings question, but I mean, and then getting a staffing contract like we did for the church.
So this has been recommended by multiple people in the community to me as I go out and speak. It has been something that we've discussed internally, but we haven't made any decisions at this point.
Alderman Senate, then Alderman Tebow.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you kind of stole my thunder there, but I'm going to go on it anyway. Because I think the discussion kind of intersects two topics. One that I'm dwelling on, which is the fact that it's October and we haven't really made many strides in establishing a overnight warming center, and a solution that could be longer term that would bring people indoors. Because while I see the appeal and to an extent the validity of a plan like a designated parking center or a designated encampment site, my big sticking point with this is that it doesn't bring people indoors. You can keep a car running for so long, there's hazards associated with that, but a tent does little to nothing to keep you warm in the middle of December. And so to build off the topic of Elm Street, but without just dwelling on Elm Street, has, well, I'm going to ask you twofold, actually, first, because I have the RFP that you had referenced in front of me, and it looks like, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, this was just an RFP for a location. Is that correct?
Correct.
On that, would there be a separate RFP required for the contracted services like we received last year?
Correct.
Okay, so that would be a separate process. In your opinion, do you feel that would probably attract more interest than the current proposal for a building?
I think that, so the reasoning behind just looking for the space first was we wanted to be sure that we could secure a location for the staff to go to.
Sure.
So I think that's why we tried to separate it. And yeah, I mean, I would hope there's members in the community, we've been having, discussing the possibility of a warming station. And there's been a lot of interest for people wanting to help out with it and make sure that we can operate it this year. A lot of people saw the successes that we had this past winter. We didn't have any loss of life due to the weather. So that's a huge success for our community. And a lot of people want to help keep it moving forward.
Follow?
Yes.
All right. So the second part that I would say, I guess, rather than a question, but also rather than just dwell on Elm Street, I know that in and around the downtown area, or at least I believe, the city of Nashua as an owner has buildings. We have more than just Elm Street, but what I think I would just implore, ask, borderline beg, is that if you haven't already, initiate those conversations, please, with the appropriate city staff. Because, again, I'm beating a dead horse. This, to me, is of the utmost urgency. If we get to January, and it was late January, if we get to late January, it's too late. This is a discussion we need to be having 2 months ago, and we're encroaching on the middle of October now. So I would just ask if we could have those conversations. I'd be happy to be part of those conversations if that were required, but if we could find something, anything, and that's all I've got right now.
Yeah, it does. I would say, and we're very cognizant that the Board of Aldermen is not, we do not manage city departments, but it seems to be our thought that this should be a decision that should be coming imminently on where it should go and how it should be set up for the community, as opposed to how we were experienced that same warming situation last year. Alderman Tebow.
Finally, thank you. Alderman Govea and Alderman Senate really took my, what I was going to say, but this is very similar, if not the same presentation we saw a few months ago, and so I don't see a lot of like next steps. And to Alderman Senate's point, it's October, so the next Board of Aldermen meeting is 2 weeks. And then if we don't have something in front of us in 2 weeks, then we're into November, right? So even if, something gets worked out in the next couple of weeks, we may not see any kind of legislation in front of us until November, and then all of a sudden it's December. So in my opinion, we're late on this, and we got to get on it now. And so what are the next steps? Like, what's coming before us? What do we need to do, or what are we going to see coming in the next few weeks that we need to act on? Because I feel like we're going to be in the same situation as last year, and that caused a lot of trouble.
We have been having internal discussions regarding the space. So I'll just reiterate, a decision hasn't been made. So we will continue to attempt to facilitate those discussions and try to push for solutions that hopefully we can bring back shortly.
And one follow-up, just saying, I would not go with anything Manchester is modeling, and I would not, all I know is we're not going to solve homeless right here tonight, so, I mean, next step for us is just getting legislation to figure out what we need to do this winter, and to Alderman Sennett's point, something for the future as well, that we don't have to keep coming back to this every year to try to figure out what to do, come October. So, thank you.
I have more chairman's privilege, so I get all these questions. So prevention. One of the things I started talking with Alderman Sullivan and numerous board members, including President Wilshire, is and the mayor, is the inclusionary zoning regarding income. Right now, it's at 80%, and I'm thinking 50, 60%, something that can meet developers and the city's needs in the middle, or if they can't commit to actually creating those units, buying us out and sending money to the house fund. Has public health engaged with Director Sullivan's department about healthcare housing, basically, in regards to bringing that down a bit and as a preventative tool to seeing more Nashuans becoming homeless because they'll have a sliding fee on rent?
So I do work partially under community development for Director Sullivan, but my primary role working with him is supporting the Housing Trust Fund Committee. So he should be able to speak more to that question.
And does any further questions for public health or the police? Anything you want to add, Chief?
I'm good.
You guys are doing a great job as always. Sorry that you're still short-staffed. Chronic management issues. You can never keep people. You gotta
Right now.
pay them more, right?
That's our job.
No, I'm not getting him on the record on anything. All right, then the next is Director Hammond, but Director Sullivan, would you commit to meeting with Public Health about zoning and stuff like that through the rezone process in this public forum? Just say that's
No, I have no interest in meeting with the Public Health Department. No, I'd be happy to, and in all seriousness, Director Bagley and Ms. Musioli and I speak regularly about this. We talk regularly about a variety of housing typologies. Sam's going to get into some detail tonight about where we're headed from a provision of affordable housing perspective. And I don't want to steal the thunder of that presentation, but with deep subsidy and great affordability comes a tipping of a scale when it comes to creation of development in the community. And so we'll talk about that a little bit tonight and allude to some future conversations that we'd like to have. But like anything, it's not simple. It's complicated. As we look for more affordable housing, there are risks that we sort of slowly turn the spigot of development off. But we'll talk about that in a little more detail tonight. But we're actively engaged in public health on a regular basis.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. And Director
Thank
Hannum,
you.
you're right. It's going to be longer than last night's meeting, guys.
You have control of that.
I feel like Alderman Jetty when he is talking about the legal aspects of legislation, when we're talking about mental health and homelessness. I just get right into the minutia, just like an attorney would on contract law. So I'm emanating you tonight. So. Director Hannah.
If you were emanating me, you'd be a lot more quiet. But
That's not true.
You got me. You got me.
Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director. I wanted to introduce the consultants from Fourth Economy, Anne and Jennifer. Thanks for hanging on and listening to that conversation. Hopefully that's actually helpful for what we're doing in this step 2 or phase 2 of this process. But I'll just do a quick introduction. I'm going to steal a little bit of the thunder for the presentation, but In looking at how we view economic mobility, we do a lot of things here at the city. As you've heard, a lot of it is kind of at the low end of the spectrum. We also want to increase entrepreneurship, get more people into the workforce. And so kind of trying to create a strategic plan for how to build that economic mobility is why I've engaged Fourth Economy. And they'll tell you a little bit about their company and why they were chosen. But they are this phase one of this process is kind of coming to a close. So the presentation here is about finding the baseline and creating kind of a scale of where we're starting from, so that we can see as we introduce interventions and new programming, how that affects our upward and economic mobility throughout the community at all levels. So I guess I will hand it over to Anne and Jen and start the presentation there. I think you can share your screen, right?
I will check now.
Oh, there we go.
Do you all see that? Great.
Yeah. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jen Sloan. I'm a senior consultant with Fourth Economy and the project manager for this economic mobility work in Nashua.
And I'm Ann Jensen. I'm a consultant with Fourth Economy, and I've been leading the data analysis on this.
And we have one team member. We'll just give her a shout out. She's not here tonight. Sally Guzik is our project director and vice president at Fourth Economy. Briefly introduce Fourth Economy. We're an economic development consulting firm. Been around for about 15 years. And we really focus on helping communities and organizations create strategic, equitable, and resilient economies. We have three sort of main buckets of work around strategy, around equity, around resilience. And we've done a lot of economic development and economic mobility planning around the country, which sort of lays a strong foundation for us to work with you all. And we've been working very closely with Liz, meeting on a bi-weekly basis to sort of check in and make sure we're on the right track. So we're gonna share a little bit of what we've done so far and what our scope is moving forward. We have about 15 minutes of presentation, and then Ann and I can stay on for about 30 minutes for discussion or questions after that. So it's nice to be with you all, and I'll pass it on to Ann. She's our data guru.
Thanks. And just to position the project, the impetus for the collaboration with the city has been the result of the Imagine Nashua Master Plan adopted in 2021, identified economic mobility and access to opportunity as the top economic development priorities for the city. And ensuring economic mobility for all residents of Nashua here means equipping them with the tools and opportunities necessary to grow and thrive in the city despite outside pressures and changes. To better understand the unique economic landscape of Nashua, our team created a list of baseline indicators that are meant to inform our understanding of the city and its needs through quantitative analysis related to a variety of socioeconomic factors, taking into account how these indicators have performed over the last 5 to 10 years where applicable. Let's see. And those are intended to help identify the potential levers, like Liz was saying earlier, to advance economic mobility among all residents. So as you can see here in this timeline, we are wrapping up that data scan and synthesis, and soon we'll be developing recommendations for focus areas. We'll take that into phase 2 when we'll be conducting focus groups, interviews, and having an in-person working session with stakeholders, which we have scheduled for Thursday, November 7th. Since that will be in person, we'll also be in town and available for some of those interviews, and we're excited to get to tour the city, see some of the things that you all find important for us to know, and to talk to some of you and some of the other stakeholders in the community. Wrapping up in February with providing that capacity support and also developing an actionable plan to address these economic factors.
And I'll just mention that the November 7th, we have just scheduled that recently, and we wanted to present in front of the committee tonight and get your feedback to figure out kind of what the primary kind of levers and topics that you want to discuss during that in-person conversation is before we start inviting the community to that as well. So invite is incoming.
Yeah.
Sorry, thanks.
So these are the data pieces that we've assembled to build out our understanding of Nashua through the lens of economic mobility. These factors can be categorized according to a few overarching themes that you see here: people, place, health and well-being, local and regional trends, drivers of economic or regional growth, transportation, and childcare. There's obviously a lot of overlap between all of these, and this isn't, a full accounting of everything that we could look at, but these were the things that we put together, reviewed with Liz, and thought were some of the most important to assemble. And the vast majority of the data points that we've collected come from publicly accessible sources, including census data, other federal data sources, some other places. So moving on into that data, we had elected to not show the people and place sections because Liz let us know that you were more familiar with the data points that are under those. But this presentation will be made available to you after this meeting, so you're welcome to review that data at your own time and, send me any questions that you have. So looking at local and regional trends in terms of jobs over the past 10 years, Nashua has seen 2% growth up to about 51,000 jobs in 2021. A little over half of these 29,000 made more than about a $40,000 a year salary. And this is considered the higher earning jobs. Similarly rose compared to 2011 with an increase of 12 percentage points. Looking at the live work rate, the inflow and outflow of jobs throughout the city, we find that of those 51,000 jobs in 2021, about a quarter of them were taken up by residents of the city, while about 3/4 were employed commuters into the city. Looking at median household income, we see that Nashua's median household income is lower compared to the county or the state, higher than for the nation as a whole. But one of the things that we had looked at was what, according to the MIT Living Wage Calculator, might be an ideal cost of living, specifically looking for a family of 4, since that's something we want, families to be able to stay and live happily in Nashua. So that number would be about $124,000. That's close to what the median household income is for a married couple family household, $122,000, but still not meeting that amount. In terms of labor force participation, it's 72%, higher than for either the county or the state. Unemployment is higher in Nashua amongst all the other comparator regions at 5.1%, sorry. That'd be a big difference. Looking at labor force broken out by race and ethnicity, we see that that tends to be higher than for the county or the state amongst all groups. So that's that blue line that you see there. In general, with a few exceptions, amongst Black residents and Asian residents, tends to be higher in Nashua. However, unemployment rates also tend to be higher. it ranges as high as 8.4% among Black residents to as low as 3.2 among those identifying as 2 or more races. In terms of poverty, we see the city has higher rates of poverty compared to the county. This is true amongst all residents, but also for those under 18 and those 65 or older, which are 2 critical groups. At the county, and this is just because this data is only available at the county level, we see that 27% of households are considered ALICE households, meaning that they're asset limited, income restrained, employed. These are households, they work full-time jobs, but they're unable to afford the basics where they live, despite making more than the federal poverty line. So moving on to our drivers of regional growth. Looking at the job trends, we see that in that same period from the previous section, 2011 to 2021, kind of white-collar jobs, professional, scientific, technical services added the most by number of jobs in Nashua at 1,000 jobs, while manufacturing lost the most at about 500 jobs lost in that period. But most jobs in the city are concentrated in retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, and still manufacturing with about 6,500 jobs. This is looking at average earnings by industry, those paying at or above the wage, the living wage for that family of 4, $124,000. So that would include utilities, finance and insurance, information, some other categories, but these are the 6 jobs, the 6 industries that would pay that living wage. Looking into some small business trends, we see that there are about 8,200 small businesses in the MSA, which comprises Manchester and Nashua. 23% have been established since 2019. Looking on to transportation, which is an important part of economic access to jobs, we see that more than 3,000 households in Nashua have no vehicle available to them. This is about 8% of households for the city and higher for the county or the state. More than half of all households have 2 or more vehicles. I still like to include the statistics just because I think it's important to consider what access those 3,000 households have. In terms of transportation to work, we see 3/4 drove alone to work, 12%, like me, report working from home. We have some information on childcare. This is coming from the state. We would like to dig more deeply in to have information that's more specific to Nashua. But at the moment, we see about 600 licensed childcare centers in the state for 2023 and 112 family childcare homes, resulting in about 43,000 childcare center spaces. In terms of cost, families with an infant paid $17,000 a year across the state, and families with a toddler paid about $16,000 a year. Getting to health and well-being, we have local food access, with the caveat that this information was most recently updated from our source with the USDA 2019, so things have likely changed somewhat, but possibly not substantially. We see that 16 of 18 census tracts are considered low access. This means that at least 500 people or more than 1/3 of the population, or 1/3 of the population lives more than a half mile in urban areas from the nearest supermarket, supercenter, or large grocery store. So that is most of the county. In terms of healthcare access, Information from HRSA reveals that 2 of 18 census tracts are designated as medically underserved populations, which 2 out of 18, but meaning that this is a specific population group is underserved, including groups with economic, cultural, linguistic barriers affecting their access to care. None were classified as medically underserved areas. We also included this risk of this lead exposure risk looking, and that ties in with some of the housing information that is in the slide deck, especially as you look at kind of older housing stock. You see that 6 of 20 census tracts in the city experience a high level of lead exposure to have a moderate risk. And that's concentrated in that kind of center right section.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, for next steps, we would love to open it up to you all and get reactions as leaders and residents of Nashua. We want to make sure that you all have a voice in this as well. The end goal is a data-informed strategy to try to advance economic mobility in the city. And so using some of this data as sort of the foundation, but then also thinking about what are the best practices around the country for advancing economic mobility in places that are similar size to Nashua, and also talking with you all. So that sort of in-person build session, which is sort of thinking about what does the data say, what do we know from our lived experience, and then the so what does that mean for the potential to advance economic mobility? So learning from you all and other city staff to help figure out a strategy that is meaningful, actionable, and sort of feasible. So those are our next steps on the fourth economy side. And see if Liz, you wanted to add anything before we open it up?
No, I guess I just hope that none of that data was a surprise, that you're all fairly aware of what's going on in the community. And so this is just a way to quantify most of what we already know as our experience here. So the next step is really getting into what do we want to do with it? How do we want to move forward? And hopefully these build sessions will be not only in-person city teams, but also our partners, our nonprofits in the area that do the work on a daily basis. So we're hoping to come up with a comprehensive plan across not just the city programming, but also working with our partners going forward. So we've had some conversations. Things like a financial empowerment center are up for grabs. We are working currently with the financial empowerment center, or Cities for Financial Empowerment, to potentially build a financial center with a nonprofit in our area. So those are all things that are kind of in the hopper, but we're not quite sure if it's the right first step or if it's a step down the line. So trying to figure that out through kind of a strategic building sessions. So I don't know if you have any questions about that, but.
Just questions about the data for anyone else, since I talk a lot. Okay. So it was 74% of the 51,000 jobs in Nashua, 74% are people commuting into the city?
Yes.
Do you know what the drive down data, what their median income is?
The
commuters coming in. One of my thoughts is, can they afford to live here?
I think, Anne, did we go through that? I don't know that it broke it out that way, though, did it?
And you don't have that information now?
No. Okay, so we did actually try to find that information, and we couldn't find it, that it is available. But we do have access to Placer AI, which might be able to help us break down that data a little bit better. But that's certainly something that we can work with to get that information before those build sessions.
That's great. And then it's 124,000 that a family of four needs, but it's the average is 122 in Nashua.
Yeah.
So we're still under, for a family of four, by a
To
couple
meet their needs,
$1,000s to meet
yeah.
their needs in the city.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
are you sure there's no medically underserved areas in the city? I swear there's one that engulfs Lead Street School that's a medically underserved
I think,
area.
Ann, do you want to go back to that map?
Yep.
Oh, there, yeah. So it looks like there are medically underserved populations in the blue sections.
Okay.
So that is essentially most of downtown, the Tree Streets, Crown Hill area.
All right, so I just misheard.
Is it? Yeah. Surprise, right? So,
Where the hospitals are.
yeah, which is interesting because that is where our hospitals are located, and those are still medically underserved populations.
And it wraps down Lead Street School, then it goes over towards the Mill Yard.
Yep.
I'm very familiar, as you can tell. But that entire area is very lack of resources. All right, that's all the questions I had.
Yeah.
Alderman Govea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the data is very nice and nicely presented. Thank you. And I think my bigger question is, at the end of all of this, what are some examples of what like an action item would look like at the end?
Yeah, so I don't, what I'm hoping for is a strategic plan with some ideas of kind of short-term, medium-term, long-term programming that can lead to kind of nationally or kind of best practices, what we've seen that support upward mobility. And so I know that Ann and Jennifer have actually done this in other communities, so they can actually probably speak better to what an end report will actually look like. But that's my goal for this. Jennifer, do you want to go over some of your other communities and what that looked like?
Sure. I think the example that sort of inspired this engagement is in Gresham, Oregon. Liz had a connection there, and we did a poverty prevention plan for them that really was focused on economic mobility, and that was similar, like looking at the data, what is the data telling us, and then thinking about what are the levers and how do we sort of ensure that we're doing the poverty prevention programming in Gresham. There was a big focus on childcare. That was a big need in the population that wasn't really being met for folks to be able to work and engage in the labor force. So there was the recommendation that came out of the report, sort of primary, was focused on child access and childcare quality. So that's an example. But the report itself, I think we can probably share the one that we did for Gresham, summarizes the data sort of in the similar way that Ann did for this presentation, and identifies some of the levers that we feel like can be pulled, both based on the data, but also based on what's feasible in terms of capacity in the city.
We've also
Is that helpful?
We've also met with public health and community development to kind of figure out they have a lot of the programming that supports economic mobility, as you've heard tonight previously, is in those departments as well. And so trying to figure out where the gaps are that can support the economic development side, kind of getting people from where they are into the workforce, and building programming that can support that, whether that's through our own programming at the city or through partners that can fill those gaps for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if per se, we had this plan and it said on it, we're lacking childcare resources in the city, is now the job that you would then go forward is to try to recruit people that do that kind of business into Nashua, because we know it's an underserved area of opportunity. Is that kind of the goal, I guess?
Yes, so that's one type of programming. Another type of programming is working with a partner like the United Way to do workshops to train in-home family care variety. Or so there are a variety of options for each goal that we create. There's different kinds of programming that we can come at it. Ways that we can come at it through different programming, I guess, is a better way to put that. But so that will depend on what the data says and what the report comes out as is. Within those interviews and the build sessions, we'll find out what programs already exist out there, what needs to be tweaked, and what other organizations are willing to kind of take some of that on as well. So we'll have some recommendations for how to move forward in that, whether that's one step forward or if it's gigantic leaps and we only do things around the childcare. It's unlikely that we would just take on one thing, but if that's the dire need right now, then we could kind of focus on that heavily throughout our partners and the work that I'm doing as well.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Is job training a fundamental aspect of these outcomes where it's like
Usually.
vocational? Or even, so I went to Great Lowell Technical High School. Am I talking loud enough? I went to Great Lowell Technical High School in Tingsboro, and I have a trade before I went to become a therapist. But we don't have that in New Hampshire or our community.
Right.
Where someone can go to high school, get their high school diploma, and leave as a journeyman or get 1 year of under their belt for their electrical license. Because trades build upward mobility. My worry is to be not wanting to be too heavy focused on professional
Right.
jobs, because you can see they dominate the city already. It's how to bring people who may not want that skill and desire others,
Right.
which is
Yeah,
probably
and
more
I
admirable.
think I'm planning to also invite the Business and Economic Administration from the state, the director or Commissioner Taylor Caswell, to these build sessions to try to participate, as well as their Economic Development Director for the state, to help them understand what our needs might be. Because likely, if there are needs here in Nashua, there are other needs in the state that kind of mirror that. And so hopefully we can get some support from the state as well as a partner going forward in some of these strategies.
Because I would say, I know it's a heavy lift to have a vocational high school, but childcare was one of the shops that you could take,
Yep.
and you could leave being a certified childcare teacher or whatever the license is,
Yeah.
or an LPN as well, an electrician. It's vast, but I know the high schools do have some trade shops, but why leverage outside providers, community resources when we can build within through the school as a way to teach people into the workforce.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do a lot of workforce analysis, and a lot of it is sort of matching or understanding what jobs are available in the community and what skills they require, and then making sure that whatever job training or workforce development programs there are actually aligned. Often they're not quite aligned with what jobs exist in the community, so that we're really training folks from within to stay. So if sort of the job training pipeline emerges as a priority for advancing economic mobility for Nashua, that's the workforce analysis is something that we could probably undertake to better understand exactly where those gaps are in terms of training. I think it's a really good point.
Alderman Clee?
The problem with the state of New Hampshire is that, without being political, is that we have a legislator and a governor that's kind of worked with some organizations to create programs that they send students to, and then they backfill the credits. So BAE says, I have a program, and send me students, and then they send students, and then they tried to find the credits, and it's been a point of contention. So it helps BAE, then the school has to figure out what credits to fulfill the students' needs to get them to graduate. And it's kind of like a backwards of doing it. So I love the idea that you're having, but the state has some kind of bogus, it happened when you were up there as well.
Oh, of course it did.
Alderman Moran, yeah.
The technical term is squirrely.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
ooh.
So, like,
Solid ringer.
Perfect.
You-
But yeah, it is kind of this type of thing, and I know the teachers and the school departments were very, very frustrated with it. But they did have some kind of technical training, so it did help BAE, and it really did help the students, don't get me wrong. It was very good technical training in that respect, but
Way
then
over-
we had to figure out how you got the credits. It could be English, it could be math, it
Yeah.
could be different things, yeah.
the way it worked for my high school was 1 week of academics, 1 week of the shop of your choosing, and it just rotates so you don't lose that academic credit piece. And then you get the on-the-job training, and then senior year you go into what's called co-op,
Yeah.
and you go into the actual field and learn from field instructors, where I feel you learn the most from the field instructors. I'm a field instructor, so I'm going to pat myself on the back, but you can only learn so much in academics. But I've talked too much, right, Alderman Jettie?
If I may, that type of a program works best, rather than trying to retrofit.
Hodgepodge, yeah.
Right, than trying to retrofit the credits to fit that way. I think that is truly a better program, but yeah, the state has something different.
My old high school history teacher is now the Undersecretary of Education from Massachusetts, and she oversaw all the technical high schools in the state, so I can always connect you guys. And not to say that that's something the school district's even interested in doing, but I always think if you learn a trade, it impacts the workforce, and the students are more likely to stay here, and they have something of value to give back to the community, and it's very well paying, admirable work. So
I think we have a great community college in the community as well, and so I definitely plan on inviting them to these build sessions so that they can be a part and help us kind of craft this strategic plan as well. So really excited to work with them to bring in that vocational work as well. Yeah.
Alderman Senate.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other thing I think that I'd like to see come out of this, especially when you talk about engaging the community partners, especially Nashua Community College, which, not to pat myself on the back, that's where I graduated from, is attracting the type of businesses that maybe would drive that upward mobility from trades or skills that you can learn through some of these partners, and then generate those jobs here in the community, so that we do have good paying jobs where people can work and live here in Nashua. Because I've found just in my own field that that's a challenge, finding a job close to home. I commute outside of Nashua to work, and I look at the communities around us, and I see the opportunities that are coming to them. And I know there's a lot of differences when you consider like Nashua versus Londonderry or something like that. But if you travel over to that airport access road in Londonderry, this brand new facility that New Balance just put up over there, looking right over the hill at you. And you drive past that and go, God, why couldn't we get that in Nashua? And it's something that I think I would engage our BIDA with as well, because something I often ask candidates that come before us for that commission is to sort of look at the properties that we're looking to develop creatively. You know, let's not look at a one-to-one transition. One retail store opens, so we need to open a new retail store in there. I work for a manufacturer that's headquartered inside an old retail store. And I don't think anybody saw that store close and said, well, a world-class manufacturer is going to go inside there, but they did. think probably people were expecting another grocery store. So just some of that creative thinking to drive job growth here in our community so that people can graduate from Nashua Community College or prospectively one day our technical high school that I'm sure is pie in the sky right now, but to graduate from those programs, find a job, and be able to stay and thrive in the communities that they grew up in.
Anyone else? I know we're getting restless. I'm sure Director Sullivan only has an hour of presidency. Two, great. All right, well, thank you, Director Hannum, and thank you those who joined via Zoom. We look forward to having future discussions.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Director Sullivan, Manager Durfee, you're up. Can't imagine everything to be doing
Mr. Chair, if I may, just briefly.
Of course.
I have good news. I actually will not be speaking at all this evening. So Manager Durfee will be.
I
did that out loud.
Several aldermen ahead of time asked if Sam could speak instead of you.
Fake news, I've heard him speak several times.
Manager Durfee will be covering tonight's presentation.
All right. Feel free to begin.
There is a slide deck that is already loaded on the desktop of that computer. It is 2024-1009 Nashua Recode PEDC presentation.
So you didn't include human
Right
affairs in
there.
the title? Okay.
Director Sullivan's 75 slide deck presentation.
You guys have the clicker?
That's the one.
Slide
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, if you could just hit the, perfect.
Hey,
They
we're
get
right
the
there on the
clicker.
top, all right.
All right. So thank you for the opportunity to give an update to the Land Use Code project. This has been quite the ride so far. We're a little over a year into it, and it's just been a tremendous experience. We've had a real privilege to work with such a well-versed consultant in the realm of regulatory development, but also land use development, which has been very exciting. And I have to certainly thank the state and the Invest New Hampshire program. We had applied for and were successfully awarded $150,000 to supplement our budget for this project. And as a result, we have been able to broaden our scope and really take a comprehensive approach at updating our land use regulations, the final product of which is going to be arguably one of the most, if not the most, progressive in context and market-sensitive land use codes in the state. So I'm very excited to reach the end of this road, but it's been a very fun road to travel nonetheless. So just to give a little frame of what we're going to cover tonight in relatively short order, I do hope, is that we'll look a little bit at the structure of the code, because it is going to be a little bit different than what we've been working under for quite some time. We'll talk about the approach to density, and then how we'd be looking into doing some production of affordable housing and really affordability at all income levels. And also, I do want to highlight that the HOP grant, the $150,000, that was phase one. They did roll out phase two recently, and this presented an opportunity to possibly get some more money. About $100,000 is what we've applied for, and that would allow us to update our site plan and subdivision regulations at the same time, really in lockstep with this land use code, which, you know, that unified approach to, you know, a regulatory change and shift, all done under the same consultant, would just really create a fantastic package of regulations. And in addition, with those dollars, we would be hoping to, with principal's assistance, develop we'll see 3 or 4 pre-approved ADU building plan sets. So one that would be reducing the upfront costs of building ADUs, but it also would provide a level of predictability for the neighborhood. And so if someone wanted to go buy some ADU plans at the building counter, they could. We would know what they are. So I just wanted to kind of make that plug, that we've submitted that grant as well, and it's very much tied into this as well. So with that, we will get right into it. There we So just a couple of pictures from, this was Code Week. This was in May of this year. Just a great stretch of, I believe, 6 events over 5 days, and tremendous public participation. I was really blown away by how many people came out to different events. We held them all across the city, trying to be in and out of government buildings to attract a wide variety of participation. And it's been a lot of fun, and principal's been stellar in their presentation to the public. So overall, high-level goal of the land use code update. This is reflected in the master plan. I will say that the master plan really sets the vision, and then the land use code manifests that vision over time through regulatory changes, and that facilitates the development that brings forth that vision. So covering a couple of high-level goals from the, there we are. So some of the key goals from the master plan that we're trying to incorporate into the land use code update, looking at the mixed use redevelopment, a mix of housing creation that is accessible, from a physical standpoint, also from a financial standpoint as well. Connectivity and creating opportunity. I think that us being third on the agenda tonight actually helps to frame a lot of the conversations that we've heard already tonight. So we'll get right into it. This code is, slide.
Oh, do you need us?
It's not capturing right now. All right.
This one? This one.
Back one.
Back one.
We can just start here. This is fine. So, building types, form, and context.
Thank God we got to see that slide.
So this is important because this is really the foundation of the code. We're recognizing that there is already an existing built environment. We should be coding for what is already there, so that things that are already there, and if we want to follow that pattern, we can. If you want to build what's next to you, you shouldn't have to go get a variance to do so. Building types. We have probably identified about 25 or so different individual building types, from cottages, bungalows, various different types of single family, triplex, very recognizable type of structure in Nashua. Example of a cut sheet from the code. This really defines the massing, the relationship of the building to the street and different frontages. Basically, this sheet helps to quantify the qualitative look and feel of different buildings so that they can be replicated, and really gives developers almost a blueprint, if you will, of how you would continue to perpetuate an existing built form. And we go all the way up to these general buildings and even some of our mill buildings. We have standards for all of these buildings, with the idea of really trying to be predictable in their built form, but also elevating that level of construction so that we're really proud of what is being built in Nashua. So all these buildings are then organized and collected into districts. These building types form the basis for districts. They organize the character of the city, if you will. So this is West Pearl Street, looking eastward towards Main Street. This is what would be called a mid-rise 4 district. You can see a number of 4-story buildings, hence the mid-rise 4 name. And you can get a sense of the different types of building types on this street that help to kind of give, really establish that sense of place or the vibe of the street. And the mix of the building types is really what lends to this street being successful as a place to do business, as a place to live, and a place to go visit and spend money. We also have an example here. This is on Amherst Street, very close to the Main Street intersection, looking westward. And this is a split where you have urban residential on the left side, neighborhood residential on the right side. Again, mix of buildings, really demonstrating here the lengths that principal has gone to classify and identify different types of buildings so that we can perpetuate those in a predictable and known way. So these are all, these are just 2 of those districts that, we have a whole set of different districts that are really drawn on from existing characters and then organized in a way that is, could be replicated. So we have, this is our current zoning map, just to give everyone a little frame of reference. And this is our current working draft of the new base zoning map. I'll flip back just so that you can see how much more granular this map is. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. There we are. So current zoning, much larger districts. The working draft really goes parcel by parcel and identifying what is there to be reflective of existing conditions. And this is really just to illustrate, again, the level of on-the-ground survey that Principal has done to make sure that we're capturing the existing conditions on the ground. And I'll show you how this plays into a new idea that's actually going to make this very easy to build under and use for us from an administrative standpoint. So these are some of the priority redevelopment areas that were identified in the Imagine Nashua master plan. We then take those, kind of expand them a little bit, find these broader areas, and these are the areas that are likely going to receive fairly significant updates to the zoning. Those are shown in the darker green. The other areas of the city in the lighter green, there's not really going to be a whole lot of change. The code is just going to be shifted to really unify it and just make it more user-friendly, again, for the homeowner, for the developer, and also for staff as well. But we're not going to be fundamentally changing the uses, the densities, or the forms in that lighter green area. Oops, too far. Just one. All right. So these priority areas get further broken down into these overlays that have different characterizations. The downtown in the magenta, very intense area of town. Infill in the blue, and then there's kind of this transitional area, the downtown east on the East Hall Street, Temple Street corridors, and then the suburban retrofit, those areas in teal, much more auto-oriented, and we're looking at different opportunities there. And then this is where we begin to kind of round out those very granular districts. This is in getting into some of the overlays, and we're going to get into a little bit more of that later. But this is really what I think sets this code apart from any others in the state, and I'll get into why, but this kind of sets the conversation we're about to have on density.
Sam, if I could just add a point quickly, maybe. We've had some conversations, certainly at the committee level, about recent rezonings that installed what we currently have as the mixed-use overlay along particularly the Amherst Street corridor and along the Daniel Webster corridor. I think you probably remember as part of those conversations that staff had expressed concern about the fact that while the mixed-use overlay is wonderful in the sense that it's a very flexible framework, it's also very challenging because it's a very flexible framework. It opens the door for a lot of unintended consequence uses and design. And so really, when you look back at some of those maps showing where the priority areas are for adding additional specificity where there's sprawl repair needed, these line up very well with the areas that we've had recent conversations about wanting to be more intentional with the way that design and form is built out. And so these areas should look familiar. These are really a focal point of the plan that, or the code that Sam has been working on.
Thank you. So into density. So again, this is very much a part of that conversation of how we intentionally incorporate affordability into housing projects at all scales. So you take your building form, lovely home here, very kindly generated by AI, as I'm sure you'll be able to point out if you look at it for long enough. So here we are. So let's assume that this house has 3,600 square feet. What is the maximum number of units? In this case, if it's just one, it's one house. However, this concept called density factor, this is how we will be regulating density. So each building type will have its own density factor that may be further modified by the district. So a density factor of 1,800 square feet on a 3,600 square foot home, you could produce 2 units. That factor is 1,200, 3 units, 600, 6 units, so on and so forth. So that is that mathematical equation that needs to be applied when you're talking about either, in some cases it is square footage of the lot, how many units you can fit on based on lot square footage. This code is really looking at the building as the primary driving factor of density. So that's an important code shift that I just wanted to highlight with that. So now getting back into those overlays. So now that we have a sense of the density and that density factor concept, we'll go back into these overlays here. So here is a snapshot of the downtown base zoning. Again, almost parcel by parcel level of specificity, recognizing the type of building that is there, coding for that so that that can continue to grow in the manner that is currently there. However, this area falls into one of our overlays. So when you look at the overlays, these districts kind of round out those areas a little bit more. It's not parcel by parcel. This is a bit more block by block or larger sections of blocks together. So the idea with these overlays, and I want to be clear that these overlays are opt-in. You don't have to use them, but we're creating incentives that would make you want to do so if you want to do a meaningful project. But if you don't, we'll just carry on, and we can keep building with the existing zoning. So we'll do a little kind of scenario here. So we'll call that our base district is urban residential, and you could build, a 2.5-story, 3-story home. Maybe you have a few units in there. Maybe there's a commercial storefront on one of them. This sort of form could be perpetuated under the base district, and no inclusionary, no affordable units would necessarily be required if you want to just kind of build as the form of the neighborhood currently exists. However, with the density factor, you have this opportunity, even in the base, there's a bonus density factor, so that lower number, meaning you could multiply or divide it by the square footage of the building, you get some more units. But to do that, you have to provide some level of affordability. And numbers are still being worked with. We're working with RKG. You may remember that consultant. They worked on the 2020 housing study. They are very in tune with market dynamics and rents and the sorts of things that developers really need to nail down in their pro forma when they're deciding whether or not to do a project. The point is, and the primary reason why we are working with them again, is because we want this code to be buildable. We don't want to install regulations that are not going to be grounded in market realities and end up with a code that no one can build under. We want this code to be successful, but we also want to accomplish other goals, such as providing housing opportunities at all levels of affordability, but also different forms and in a way that is predictable and is acceptable to the community and they'll fit in. So again, IZ numbers, these are all just for discussion purposes, but these will all be fleshed out, and we will be doing a much more in-depth session with you all in some capacity, probably with Principal and RKG, and we can really drill down into the what, where, the when, the why, and the how of making this IZ really work. So again, there's an option, tap into a more aggressive density factor by providing affordable units. Now, when the overlay comes into play, the overlay allows you to potentially build that next increment of building type. It unlocks that new tier of building types. So that might be another story. It might be a larger massing building envelope that provides for more opportunity for more units. But to get into that overlay, the incentive is to, you get these additional units, you get to use these larger buildings, but there's a greater level of affordability that you need to provide, whether that is number of units and or a deeper level of affordability, from 80 to 60 or 60 to 40 or 30. We can play with those numbers depending on what the need is, and I think that's going to be part of that conversation for that more in-depth session that we have. And then again, you have that density factor that can be modified as well. And I'm going to hold on this slide for a little bit because I really think that there's 3 ways to achieve affordable housing. You have, capital A, affordable housing, state subsidized, Monahan Manor, Maynard Homes, these large projects, hundreds of units, big injection of affordable units, but concentrated, right? It's in one area, and it's certainly going to make a dent in the need. But these are massive projects. It takes a lot of coordination. There's a lot of state dollars involved. It's not for the faint-hearted developer. Developers make their careers doing this because it is so specialized. There's also the missing middle housing, and that's more like an ADU or a small home. It's not your 3,000 square foot single family detached home. That's really not attainable for the vast majority of home buyers, first time home buyers included. But that smaller home, that starter home, that just developers aren't really building right now because there is such a market for these larger homes that why waste the land that really is quite scarce? But how do we find ways to plug in those other building types to provide a buying opportunity or a more affordable rental opportunity? So those are 2 ends of the spectrum, that missing middle and then these big affordability projects. The third type is in the middle, and these are the projects that internally subsidize the affordable units because there are enough units in the building to cover the cost of that affordable unit or those handful of affordable units. Now, there's a lot of interest, we've seen it at the planning board, of moderate developers who want to build that 10, 20 unit product, and that's a great level of kind of organic incremental growth that we're seeing in a lot of the neighborhoods. With our current IZ, we have 2, maybe 3 projects that have actually incorporated affordable units under that mechanism. And I don't think that's successful. Those aren't great numbers. I think we can be frank about that. So the question is the current IZ just not reflective of current market conditions? There's some reason why it's not being successful.
I'm sorry, Sam. What's IZ? What does that mean?
Inclusionary zoning. My apologies. So that's the mechanism for affordable units being developed. And so how do we fix that? And I'm quite confident that because of the housing market, the current conditions on the ground, this is an area where there is a lot of opportunity for kind of organic, incremental development and growth in this sector. And if we get the IZ numbers right, I think we will produce more affordable units in that sort of development than we would in those capital A big projects. And they're going to be dispersed throughout the city. It's going to be more reflective and provide more opportunities for people to get into housing. And that's why we are spending so much time. We're working with a secondary consultant to really nail this, because right now our IZ is not performing the way that it should. Mostly, and I think it's because it's not reflective of current market conditions, and that's why we're spending so much time focusing on this, and why we also want to have a deeper session with you all to talk about the intricacies and really get into the weeds of the economics of what drives it.
I would just add maybe that this is not unanticipated. Folks may remember who were on the board when we adopted the inclusionary zoning ordinance several years ago that Director Marchant, myself, Director Cummings, we were clear that the ordinance needed to be regularly updated and that the methodology behind the model that formed the basis of the percentages and the numbers in the ordinance would have to change over time. And think back even just 2 years ago, the market has changed substantially since the ordinance was initially installed. Building costs are much higher. The cost of land is much higher. Those numbers no longer make sense. And so to Mr. Durfee's point, we're confident that the percentages certainly need to be tweaked. We're working very hard to try and hone those numbers. But we also recognize that through leadership by this committee and certainly the entire board and the mayor, there's also an interest in creating even deeper affordability at some level in projects across the city. And we've seen that on projects particularly where the city either owns the land or is managing a development agreement. You've asked for low-income housing tax credit units. You've asked for 60% affordability. And we can do that in those scenarios because we control many of the costs involved with the development. But we need to start thinking about those scenarios where we don't control the land, we don't have that ability. how do we still get that level of, or those bands of affordability in those projects? We think we need to really modify the ordinance to see those results, because we're not seeing it right now.
You go next?
I'll leave it there.
That's where we're at? All right. The hard stall, I was like, are we going more? Or are we more
We have a project website. I encourage you to check it out. Galleries of all the public outreach we've been doing. It's quite nice.
I have a question, but I'll wait. Anyone else? Questions? Alderman Jettie, great.
Thank you. So, so what about this probably goes against the affordability aspect, but the city's goal to get away from fossil fuels and encourage building, buildings that are heated and cooled without using fossil fuels. Does this deal with that at all?
It certainly does. I'll admit that I tailored this presentation to touch a bit more on inclusionary zoning and affordability, but so that density factor that we talked about, that can also be modified by a number of what we're calling green scores, where you can bring that number down by either making your building net zero, providing charging infrastructure. We have a whole slate of different things that would modify that number for you. Infiltrating groundwater, using green infrastructure. There's a whole menu of options that you'd be able to utilize in concert with providing affordable units. And there's a relationship there, because you're taking two paths to modify the same number for basically the same outcome of greater density, and how we leverage those against each other, where, ideally, a developer is doing both to really get that exact density factor they need. But that's not to say that someone might just go all out in a really green building, but maybe they won't do too many affordable units, because doing so would be very expensive, so they might not be able to recoup. So we're still trying to massage that relationship and understand how we can be successful on both fronts.
Brief follow-up. I think when I think about this code and what Mr. Durfee's been working on, in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a heavily incentive-laden code that on its face may appear in some ways to be more restrictive than the current code that we have in place. But the reality is that the reason we're being very deliberate about putting those incentives into place is because there are all of these community values out there, whether it be housing affordability, it be greening of buildings, it be design. The way that we can appropriately regulate within the context of state statute is to articulate those community values through incentives. And so we're trying to build in many incentives that give you increased density, give you modified building form, that in a way maybe may not exist in our current code, or we're not quite as restrictive in our current code. But we're doing that so that folks are not necessarily pushed into the incentives, but they may look at the incentives as a real opportunity to create a better project for them financially. And so it's maybe a roundabout way to accomplish the goal of those community goals, but we think it's the best strategy within the current context of New Hampshire state law and the tools that we have available to us.
You mentioned the starter home market, which is fading or occupied. What about in this land use code, is there anything to help facilitate manufactured homes, building new parks, new manufactured parks opening up in the city? Because that seems to be more of the starter home price range right now. That, a stick-built house in 2016 could be $200K. Now it's a manufactured home that's at that price.
Right. Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And, whether it's a manufactured home or modular homes, there's different ways to approach it. But, all in all, you're building off-site and then siting it in a location. The challenge there is obviously availability of land. So the code in no way, shape, or form is going to, discriminate against, that building type. It's recognizing that it's a single-family use, most likely, there's going to be some recognition of character in existing districts, and there will be perfectly acceptable places for these places to go, and with an eye of recognizing that there's a need for expansion, and then we're just navigating that in a way to do so, that is, acceptable to the community, but also at the same time providing opportunity in that form and at that price point.
Any other questions? Alderman Clee.
Just more comment and so on. Being on the planning board, I get to see a lot of this talk, and I also get to hear a different perspective from those on the planning board. And so some of the comments and that came up were of a different ilk. And one of the things that they'd mentioned was there was a little bit of anxiety about, that we're going to create plans. We're going to put up plans for like the builders and so on. When we were talking about the different aspects of it, that when we have these builds and say, these are the kind of houses we want to see, or these are the kind of, when we were talking about the different aspects of it, and people were saying, we're going to force people to build houses that we want. They're not going to come in here to Nashua and build, and Mr. Durfee very, very eloquently said to them, no, we're going to kind of help you with the design. So all of the work that this kind of recode and design and so on is doing is actually, in my opinion, going to, I think, bring people in to want to build here in Nashua. And I think a lot of the things that we're doing of trying to create these building types in these districts are going to want to make it easier for them to want to come in. It's going to make it easier. While I may not agree with everything in some of the rezone, I see Director Sullivan kind of smiling because he knows I have little anxieties about certain things. I really do think a lot of work has gone into this, and I do think thoughtful work has kind of gone into this and so on. And I think we are a very built up community, but I do see that we can still kind of work to make things better and bring, pardon I'm groping for words here, but I think we can bring people in here who are going to want to build, and we're going to make it easier for them, and it's going to cut through a lot of the red tape. So in the long run, it's going to make it cheaper for them to build. So maybe then when it comes to doing inclusionary zoning or making housing that we want that's more affordable, we've kind of cut things a little easier on the other end for them. So I think some of these things are really good. I'm not always 100% on board with it, but I do think in the long run it will be good. And I did like hearing things that the planning board had to say. So I don't want to call it cookie cutter because that's not what it is, but it's giving them different ideas of saying this is what Nashua wants to see here in Nashua. So,
I would agree.
Thank
This
you.
is very well thought out, planned, and executed to have that level of detail, even just in the PowerPoint, to illustrate exactly, because what may be the exception of Alderman Clee, the details piece of this, the minutia that goes into this, so, it's over our heads. Alderman Clee sees this all the time on the planning board, but just to be able to, you kind of illustrate it this way so we can understand and see the benefits that would come out of it is very, very helpful.
I would encourage anyone to come back to the planning offices and walk down our hallway. We have all of the cut sheets and the maps, papering the walls, and grab me out of my office, I'll explain how everything's working together, and they're constantly being updated, but it's nice to have it. I don't have enough space in my office, so I've taken over the hallway to throw all these things up, and people from other departments are looking at it like, oh, that's really interesting. So it is attention grabbing, but like you can also just really dive into the weeds, and it looks like a lot, and there are a lot of standards there, but when you start using it, I'm confident that it's going to be actually a lot easier than our current code is, and it's, I think, really going to help facilitate quality development.
Alderman Lopez?
Can we actually take those and maybe make a publicly available display? I know the library has an art gallery, which is pretty heavily used, but I appreciate what's being done here, and I see the benefit to it, but I also think there'd be a lot of concern, in particularly the areas that are kind of focused for, changes to zoning, or areas where there might be opportunities to change. I don't think people want to see their neighborhoods necessarily get gentrified or modified to, bigger and more dense building standards, which I know isn't the intent, but I know that's probably the place people are going to go to. So as we present this, maybe it would be a good idea to put it somewhere as a display, some of the thought behind it, so that it isn't just you have to come to the third floor city auditorium on this night and see what was going on, or this thing. Instead, put it somewhere where people can kind of explore it themselves, as you're describing.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We have these massive, I think they're 4x8 poster boards that we've used in a lot of our community engagement sessions. And I've been thinking about how to craft one in a way that shows the pretty pictures of the code, but also meaningful design standards in a way that it can speak for itself. Because I do worry that without a little pamphlet to guide you on how to, you could get lost. But I completely agree that there would be a tremendous opportunity in presenting something and having it just there, and then also say, scan a QR code for the video that walks you through it or something like that. I'm sure there's something that we could do, and I would love to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Jettie.
Yeah, and so, what about the, we've talked about the, in the certain parts of the city, providing for, an opportunity to kind of preserve avoid light pollution, and I can't remember the name that's assigned to it, but kind of a, dark skies or whatever. Have we done that for the more rural parts of the city?
So just to quickly respond, so what you all don't know is we're keeping a little tabular data sheet on all of you about what your interests might be in this code. And so I'm sort of serious, I'm sort of not. Alderman Jettie.
If there is, it's right to know available.
No,
yeah,
from a
sure.
zoning perspective. In all seriousness, I mean, we have a couple of areas of sensitivity, I think, not just for you as alderman, of course, but for different areas of the city. And Alderman Jettie, truly, one of our known areas for you is this area of sort of light zoning. And so there has been consideration of that, and Sam can go into more detail about what that means, but we know that there's going to be an interest in having sort of light zones, downtown being clearly different in the lumens that are allowed and the light pollution that's allowed than somewhere like certainly your ward or the Merritt Parkway area, right? We know there are going to be different standards in sections of the city, and so maybe talk a little bit about that.
He likes maps too, just so you know.
Yes, he does.
Yes, we'll be producing quite a few maps out of this process. But I think what Matt touched on was the idea of light zones is a perfect way to describe this. We are going to have lighting standards in the sense that, all lighting should be either directed at the ground or at a building in a way that is cut off and it doesn't escape out into the sky. That's always the idea. And then, going into specifications around, intensities of lights, those would be governed by the zone. It may be as simple as having 3 zones. This is kind of a secondary part of the code. Once we've developed the structure and the districts, that will then inform these more complementary items that are very much a part of it, whether it's lighting or landscaping or these other kind of second tier set of regulations that plug into the districts. That's the phase that we're about to enter. And we will have a first draft of this code, districts, building types, the core things that are really driving this, hopefully in around November to push out to everybody. And following that, probably after the holidays, we'll begin another round of public engagement sessions and meetings, in a more formal sense with aldermen and various boards and committees.
Director Sullivan.
I just want to put Mr. Durfee on the spot. Is your expectation that ultimately those lighting zones will be tied to either the overlay or the underlay zoning, and certain allowances will be allowed in certain zones, whether overlay or under?
Yeah, I think anytime that you open a district sheet, it'll tell you which lighting zone you're in. But you would also have a master lighting map, which you could refer to that, and then based on location, deduce which lighting zone you would in. You could do it either way.
Alderman Clegg.
Thank you. That kind of adds to one of my concerns about the overlays, and I know I'm using the wrong term, so I apologize. The one that we hear about a lot up in planning, that Amherst Street area where, and I don't want to bring up anything specific, but things like that always have concerns to me, where you've got bigger businesses and changing so close to residential areas. Even though all parties kind of knew they lived close to each other, the minute one changes, it can have a drastic effect on the other. Residents who move in don't always know, I mean, the businesses know, but the residents don't always know to what extent. So when you're talking about lighting and you're talking about all these things, they can have very much an effect on these. And residents really don't know. Let's be honest. They move in, they buy a place, they say, oh yeah, I can see this. They don't know to the extent of how much growth that business can actually become. They don't know they could become a giant mall or whatever. And suddenly this little home that they bought is now, as we hear about up in planning and so on. So these mixed use and overlays and so on, they do concern me when we see these kind of things like that. And so I just want to make sure that we do consider protections. And so when we talk about lighting and having these types of zones, that we make sure that if we do have either ones that residents that exist, that we protect that. So if we're going to allow them to live together, we need to make sure that we have protections in there that will do that. Does that make sense?
Certainly.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Director Bagley and LaTanya, right? I got it. The Assistant Chief left, so he didn't get that opportunity. And Director Hannum, of course, and members of the public for coming. Communications.
There is none.
Unfinished business.
None.
New business resolutions.
None.
New business ordinances.
None.
Tabled in committee.
None.
General discussion. Public comment. Come on up.
So I'm Reverend Sally Newhall. I live at 33 Digital Drive here in Nashua. This is the most exciting meeting I've been to in this chamber since I moved to Nashua. I just think I've lived in Nashua now 13 years, and I've just seen the momentum growing, and it's sort of like it all exploded tonight. I commend you as aldermen and women for all the work you're doing. I commend you for the staff that you've hired who've done just amazing jobs. But I have to tell you, I almost want to use theological language. If you don't find a way to take care of our homeless this year, I think we will be sinning as a city. We have empty property. We have people who need that property. It may not be the best solution, but to know you've got that and not do anything with it, I think is horrendous. And I know, because I've seen what you've done over the last 13 years, that you can do this if you put your collective minds to it. And so please do put your minds to it and figure it out. Because the first year I was here, I went out in the winter to hand out $5 gift cards to McDonald's so people could get in out of the cold. And it hasn't gotten better in Nashua since then. It needs to get better now. Thanks. And thank you again for all you do. You're amazing folks.
And thank you for continuing to hold us accountable. Remarks by Alderman? Seeing none. Alderman Gouveia, do you have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Yay.
The ayes have it. We're